Welcome to Epic Conquerors. Your host, Dr. Judy Bauer and Chad Smanjack. You are epic. Everything is possible in Christ. The battle is real. The victory is assured.
Welcome once again to the Epic Conquerors podcast. Thank you for joining in and sharing this conversation with Mama J and myself. We're looking forward to moving through a bunch of great new topics that have been laid on our heart. And today we're going to start off with a conversation that Mama J wrote a blog about, or a devotional, which is infectious. So Mama J, starting with your first sentence, which is out of Haggai 2:10-14, it says, holiness is not infectious. And I thought that was a very interesting way to start off your blog with.
Yeah, it's kind of right in your face, isn't it? Holiness is not infectious.
It jumped right at me because it says infectious, and then we go, holiness is not infectious.
Not infectious.
Very interesting.
It's right in your face to make you think about it. I just think it's a fascinating passage because it's talking about what Haggai was writing about was how the glory of God is going to fill his house. And we are God's house, right? We're his dwelling place. So basically, Haggai was teaching all the priests the principle of God, that holiness and unholiness don't mix.
So when you say holiness is not infectious, Mama J, when I think of that, it's like sin is infectious, right?
Yep. Yep.
But holiness is not something you can catch. It's something you have to seek, and you have to go through, a process, and obviously be holy. You don't just receive holiness by being around someone that's holy, right? Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, well, holiness by itself means that we are separated unto God. So we have set ourselves apart to serve the Lord, to be available to the Lord, for God to fill us with himself. So we, instead of setting ourselves apart to serve the world, an example that we would use now as Christians, we are instead setting ourselves apart to serve the Lord, and we want him to fill us. So what Haggai was talking about is that we each have to make our own decision if we're going to live for God or not. I can't make a decision on your behalf for you to separate yourself unto the Lord.
Very interesting. So it's kind of like if you put a drop of salt water into a container of pure water, that water is no longer pure, right? Because now it's contaminated. It's got salt in it.
That's right. That one little drop messed up that whole big whatever container you had filled with pure water. No longer is it pure.
I see that all the time at my house in my fruit bowl, right? When I put, you have your fruit in your nice little bowl, and then one of those pieces of fruit will start to get moldy. And before you know it, the entire bowl gets contaminated and they all get moldy. So, it's interesting how you say that. It's funny how that part, it's so infectious, like sin can be so infectious. Hanging around the wrong people or in the wrong environments or in the wrong places can be infectious, and that sin can jump on you.
Yeah, and then it pulls you away.
Yet holiness
from
isn't
being
the same
separated
thing.
to God. Yeah,
holiness is the other way around. Like you said, you need to purpose yourself, and you actively need to choose holiness yourself. It's not going to just hanging around with a bunch of people that are holy or in that environment
or living for
necessarily.
God. Yeah, isn't going to make you necessarily live for God, right? But the opposite is true. Like, that's where I think like teenagers and young adults sometimes get themselves into trouble, even older adults obviously as well. They think, well, I can go to this situation or go to that bar or go to this other situation and it's not going to bother me. But it's going to influence you, because unholiness is infection. It's infectious. Just kind of like if somebody's sick with a virus or something, just because I'm healthy doesn't mean that you hanging out with me, you're going to become healthy. No, the opposite is true. Your infection is going to infect me, and my healthy body is now going to be contaminated, and it's going to have to go through a process of healing.
It's interesting because it always comes back down to that. Like when we're going through that, it comes back down to choice, right?
Yeah.
You need to actually make that choice. So you need to make that choice to seek God. You need to make that choice to be holy, or you need to make that choice to put God first.
Right.
It's not one of those things that just, happens on its own. Going back to Adam and Eve, right? God had given them everything. He had given them authority and access to himself and this beautiful garden and pretty much everything else that was in that garden, except for the one tree. And he said, don't eat from that tree.
Yeah.
So there was that choice, right?
Yeah, there had to be a choice. Yeah.
Because the relationship with God has to be based on love. And love comes from a choice because you choose to love someone. Because otherwise it becomes like a slave relationship if you're forced to it.
That's
so that's
right.
interesting.
You have to love because you want to. That's real love, right? Love because you have to really isn't love after all. It's just a pseudo situation, and it doesn't really have that same significance. So that's why there had to be a choice involved. And even in our lives today, we don't have that, don't eat of that tree, but we do have the choice to choose to keep our fellowship with God as a priority in our life and to stay true to what his purposes are for us.
We always come back to that powerful concept, love, right? Because love's everything.
Yeah.
And it's the power in love is obviously making that choice of your own free will to give yourself to someone else or something else, like to give yourself to God. So the power is making that choice to hand over that love. In so many different places around the world today, people don't have that choice, and they're forced to love someone or they're forced to give themselves to someone, and that's slavery. And unfortunately, that's demonic, and that's on that you see that showing up so much more in our modern day society. From going through the scriptures, you see one of the foundational bases of love is always the free will choice.
Yes.
I think that was so powerful for God. He could easily have mandated, hey, you will love me. That's just what it's
right. I am God after all. Hello.
Exactly. I created this and I can take it away from you. So love me now. But he didn't, because he never wanted that. He never wanted that slave relationship. He wanted that relationship.
Because you want to.
It came out of the fact that you made the decision and the choice. I think sometimes people have a hard time with that. They're like, well, God created us. Yeah, he created us. And why do things happen? Well, they happen because he gave you free will. Because he wanted that love to come organically from you by choice.
And so when we choose to separate ourselves unto God, that's holiness, then we choose to do that out of a love for God, right? Because he first loved us, we realize he loves us so much. How can we not love him back in return? And out of that love relationship, we choose to live holy unto him.
Well, out of that relationship too, from the position of love, we choose to be obedient, right?
Yeah.
And to hear and obey to what he has said. Because again, the foundation is love, but it's our choice based on that love that we have for God to say, hey, I'm going to obey. I'm going to hear and I'm going to obey. And I'm going to do those things that are going to bring me closer to God, that are going to make me holy, that are going to be infectious in me, so that the closer I get to God, the more infected I'm going to become with his Holy Spirit.
That's right. Because it's just like an interesting concept. If, like obedience, why would we want to obey? Well, the reason we choose to do that is out of our love for God, because we know that he loves us and he has our best interests at heart. So he's not going to require something of us that's not the best for us. Kind of like a parent, when your children are young, they experience that you love them with all your being. And so you cater to them, you give to them, you do all these things. But in return, if you say, don't touch that or don't do that or whatever, there's an expectation that because they know that you have their best interests at heart, if you say, don't touch that hot stove, then they're going to obey and not touch that hot stove. But if they touch that hot stove, now they're going to realize the consequences of not trusting the love of the parent to tell them, don't touch that hot stove, because it was for their best interests and for their good to not touch it.
Well, that transports me back to my childhood. And how many times were we told, And it's funny now that we're adults, we always say, well, you don't need to learn from my mistakes. Like I always told Dior that. It's like, you don't need to learn from my mistakes, darling. Let me just explain to you how this worked out for me. But then I remember my parents telling me the exact same thing.
Yeah.
There's no reason for you to have to go through the same life lessons as we did. Just learn from our mistakes. Yet we still wanted to go and touch that stove to make sure it was hot.
And what did we discover? Boo! It burned.
But then it always comes like, oh, I didn't know that was going to happen. So it's interesting.
Yeah, that famous other child in the house always, I didn't know, It was like, okay, you did know, you just chose to do it anyway. And that's kind of a sense of rebellion, isn't it? That kind of gets in there. And that's the thing that we're all constantly crucifying in order to keep our relationship with God pure and be living separated unto Him. It's kind of like in a marriage too. I mean, Gary and I have been married for coming up 54 years now. That's a long time. We've had to make a lot of choices because we love one another. There's a price to love. And so in those choices, we did that because it's best for us as a unit to make those choices. And that's kind of how it is with God too. There's so many things.
Maybe a little more explanation on it, because that's always something, that could be a hurdle. There's choices to that love, right? Like
That's
you just said right there. So you actually sometimes you have to make hard choices, or choices that aren't as comfortable as you want them to be for love, right?
Yeah. And if one partner or the other doesn't make the same right choices, let's say, to honor the marriage relationship and to try to be separated unto each other, to be holy unto one another, then that ruins that. It's kind of like how we can ruin our relationship with God too when we make choices that are not godly or not God-like. Then it moves us away from having fellowship with Him, because He's not going to allow sin into His space. He's not going to let that moldy fruit infect Him, right? So in that same way, we have those choices to make constantly.
So every day is a choice. Every day we get up, we have to make a choice. Today, am I going to seek God? Am I going to move towards holiness? Or am I going to allow my circumstances, the people around me, to infect me and move me away from that? Yeah. So it's a conscious effort. And I mean, in the environment and the world we live in today, that's a daily decision. Like you have to purpose your mind on a daily basis, saying, when you wake up today, this is what I'm going to do. Yeah.
And there's been times in my life, and I'm sure you can attest, and even our Epic Conqueror community that's listening right now, that there's been times when you had such a close relationship with God and you just felt Him with you constantly, and it was wonderful. And then there's other times where you felt like, God, where are you? And then you had to kind of like take stock of yourself and like, what decisions have I been making lately that's contaminated me in a sense and pushed me away from being able to enjoy that wonderful, rich fellowship with Him. So we do that in our friendship relationships and marriage relationships, parent-child relationship. Everywhere there's a relationship, there's always choice involved of what we will invest in one another. And we make those choices because we love.
So Mama J, what is your filter that you use, for instance, like when you need to, after walking, this path for so long, obviously being in the ministry for, 50 years, you've
not
gone
quite,
through close enough.
50 years, but let's say 40 something. Okay.
We're just going to say, what kind of filters, like when you come to make a decision, how do you purpose your mind, and like when you're going to make a decision, what are your thoughts? Like, what are you thinking about, and how do you process through that?
Well, usually the interesting thing about, like, for example, going back to the parent one where he said, don't touch the stove, right away that child looks at that stove, looks at the parent, and they have to make a decision, right? So some things are really obvious like that. Like I remember once when I was a youngster, we had neighbors next door. They had 5 boys, and the one little boy was definitely a little stink pot. And one day when we were out in the yard, we watched him with a bat in his hand, looking at the head of his little baby brother. And you could see in his eyes the thinking going on, like, should I bonk him over the head with this bat
Oh my God.
or not? And you could watch the wheels turning, and he made the wrong choice. He bopped his brother on the head. Of course, he wailed out and screamed, and Mom came out, and then the kid with the bat got a whooping. So he had to learn from that choice that if he loves his brother, he doesn't want to bop him on the head. So sometimes we have to learn by what we experience the consequences of to make better choices. And hopefully by that kind of training, by having to endure consequences, we'll have a better response when we have a temptation moment to choose wisely.
Yeah. So, I think a lot of that comes through, like you were saying, through trial and error in essence, right? We're going through life, like we always talk about the zigs and the zags. And, as we journey through life,
you learn.
We learn different processes, right?
Yeah.
Things don't always work out the way we want them to do, because obviously it's all in God's divine timing. But the key, I think, as we process through this whole life journey is to realize what, when we get off path, and we realize it as fast as possible so that we can get back and start getting our eye back on the prize, which is obviously moving to that infectious holiness that we keep talking about.
Yeah. Well, holiness is, we're not able to pass that on to somebody else. Evil is infectious. Evil will always invade us and take us over and overcome us. But holiness is not that way. Holiness is a separate decision that you constantly make all the time. It stands alone. It doesn't affect or infect other people. But someone else's evil can influence and infect your personal life and take you away from your fellowship with God. So those are the things why it's important. Like it says, bad company corrupts good character. If we hang around with the wrong people or we hang out in the wrong situations, that will be infectious and it will invade our living separated unto God.
So doing things like obviously staying constantly in the Word, in prayer, being around in fellowship, these are the things that we need to do on a constant daily basis to ensure that we stay in a state of holiness and continually keep God in the front and center, right?
Right.
So it's not the infectious side. It's about an action on a daily basis that we're moving towards to make sure that we stay, on that path to holiness.
Yeah, it's a constant decision to not eat of the tree like Adam and Eve had to make. Every time they passed by that tree every day, they had to think, should I eat of that tree or not? And then, of course, the enemy came along and slithered through the garden and just said, well, come on, it can't really be that bad, and finally wore down their defenses and they compromised and gave in. And there was great consequence from that. It separated them from God, and a whole lot of things happened as a result of that. We learn in the same way.
And I think that shows up on a daily basis, even though that's a representation of Adam and Eve back then in the garden. When you think about it on a daily basis, right, that tree and that fruit shows up, whatever that might be in your particular life journey, but it shows up and you have to make that decision. And some days it's a lot stronger than others. Some days you'll see it and be like, it's not that big of a deal.
Right.
But other days you'll see it and it will be the big shiny object that you just can't get out of your mind.
Yep.
And I think that's when you say the closer you stay to holiness and the closer you stay in your relationship with God, the less power that will have over you. Because as soon as you start to separate, like you're saying, and you start to isolate and you move away from that, that's when that shiny object starts to get a heartbeat of its own and it starts to say, come and get me.
I like that. It gets a heartbeat of its own. It takes on its own life in you now and affecting you. I mean, we can take it with simple things too, just like sugar and carbs and bad carbs and things like that. They are infectious. If you start eating that sort of thing, pretty soon it starts crying and screaming for more. So you have to make those conscious decisions to not have that. And so after a while, you don't even desire that. But in the same way, we can kind of see the correlation.
And also when you first start, that's what's always interesting. When you first say to yourself, well, I'm not going to be eating, like so many people, well, I'm not going to be eating chocolate now. I'm not going to be, eating bread or whatever you might be choosing. Yeah. When you first make that choice, kind of like when God said to Adam and Eve, eat of everything else, but not that tree, not that fruit. then suddenly that's the one that
battle begins.
Exactly. That's like, all right, I don't care about anything else except that one.
All of a sudden you get fixated on it. I have to have that now. Oh gosh, that's the hard part of our life journey that we make. But once you really love someone, like let's picture back when you're a young teenager and you have your first love infatuation or something. I mean, everything takes second place compared to this new love in your life kind of a thing. And it's not even an issue, not even a hardship or anything to just give up everything for that person because you love them so much. But then after time goes on, that love wanes a little bit and reality sets in. And then now the battle begins. And in the same way in our walk with God, we love him when we first get born again, filled with the Spirit, all those wonderful things, and those experiences with God are so exciting. We love him with all of our heart. Just nothing else holds a candle to that. But then as life carries on and reality sets in and the day-to-day of living happens, now we kind of aren't as infatuated, if you will, not at that level of devotion. And that's why in Revelation, John talks about when we've lost our first love, consider how far you've fallen. So I think that's our choice, Chad, always as we're going through our life with the Lord, is to just keep the flame of God's love for us and ours for him white hot, so that everything we do is like, oh, I just don't want to do anything that would disturb this amazing relationship that I have with God. And that's the choice every day, to keep fanning that flame and staying in that first love sensation, if you will, or decision to love God and serve him with all of our heart and soul and strength, because he is so awesome.
And that is true, Mama J. It's a daily thing, a daily decision, like we said, a daily choice, because regardless of what it is, or like that initial phase, that first, the honeymoon phase or whatever you want to call it, that excitement, that slowly dwindles, and then it gets to the point where you actively have to work on the relationship. People are like, oh, well, then it's not love. That's not true, because you can't live in that honeymoon phase for 50 years.
That's right. It's a conscious decision. Yeah. Because initially, like they left their socks laying on the floor and they didn't put the toilet paper roll on the right way or whatever. It doesn't bother you at all. It's like, oh, that's so endearing and everything. But after a while, it's like, pick up your socks, put that toilet paper roll around the right way, and those things now become an irritant. And so in the same way, we make those kind of conscious decisions to stay in love, if you will, with that person. And in this situation, we're talking about in God as well, to make that conscious decision, God, I love you with all my heart and soul and strength. It is my pleasure to serve you.
Yes. So, Mama J, as we move through and we kind of we wrap this session up, what would you give as a takeaway, or as some practical steps that our Epic Conquerors community can use in order to ensure that they're constantly moving towards holiness and avoiding being infected by those things of the world that are constantly trying to drag them back down?
Well, we kind of talked about hear and obey at the beginning there. You mentioned that. And I think that's really one of the key components to kind of help us gauge our own love quotient towards our walk with God. Do we love to obey whatever we read in the Word, or when God quickens something to us and says, go bless that person or go do that situation? Do we hesitate, or do we withdraw, or do we choose to jump right into it? So I think hear and obey would be such a discipline to begin to develop more of a desire to do that, that we would be quick to hear and quick to obey. That would be my suggestion.
Quick to hear, quick to obey, quick to recognize where you are in that current moment. Be aware of your circumstances and the decisions you're making and the actions you're taking to make sure that you're not moving away from God.
Yeah, because if I'm slow to obey and slow to want to hear what he has to say, I'd rather hear what anybody else has to say, then that should already be a red flag to me, like how far I've moved away from my first love, where he was everything to me, right? So that would be kind of a way to filter that.
Beautiful, beautiful. So now we come to that the highlight of the show, and we have to spotlight that spiritual weapon, spiritual weapon of warfare. What would that be for you, Mama J, as we discuss this topic, infectiousness?
You almost got your tongue twisted on that one. My weapon to spotlight this time, Chad, would be love. Because love conquers all. Love covers a multitude of sins. Love, God is love. And so he first loved us. And when we will just love him in return the way he loves us, wow, that will defeat the enemy and defeat any evil from penetrating our lives, causing us to be unholy. It will keep us wholly separated unto the Lord when we walk in love.
And I'm going to highlight what's on the other side of the fence, and you actually just mentioned it, which is holiness.
Yeah.
So stay in that mindset of holiness, constantly seek those things that are holy and those things that are moving you towards a better relationship with God. And if you just keep holiness in the forefront of your mind when you're making decisions, hopefully that will be a filter that will help you to make the correct decisions.
And kind of an easy way to say, is this the right decision, is to picture Jesus there with you in that situation. If you're halting between two opinions, if Jesus visibly was right here now, would this be something that he would do? And that can kind of help gauge questionable things that you might be wondering, because inside yourself, he will give you that assurance that yes, green light, or you'll feel, this doesn't sit right with me. So that would be like, no, don't do it. It's a good way.
I love that, Mama Jane. Yeah. And then we get to the other exciting part of the podcast, the affirmation.
Affirmation, our epic power affirmation. This one would be so great to say is, I am sold out to God. Because that is a power affirmation that every day we can say throughout the day when we have decisions to make. Just say, I am sold out to God. And I think it's going to really help clarify which way you should make that decision when that's your affirmation.
I am sold out to God. Love
Amen.
It. Resonates. And like you said, if you continually say that on a daily basis, you're going to make the right decisions.
Yep. Yeah, because he's going to help you make that decision, because you just declared and decreed right there that he is your everything and that you are sold out to him. So he's going to help you in that situation. So drum roll, everybody. You know how we do it. We drum roll on the count of 3. We say it together. I am sold out to God. Are you ready? Drum roll your lap or your dash of the car, steering wheel, desk, wherever you are. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. I am sold out to God.
Woo. Love it.
That's fantastic.
It's difficult to say that, Mama J, and then make the wrong decision. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's why it's such a powerful, epic affirmation for us. This has been great, Chad. What a great conversation. It is important to talk about these things from time to time, because the world and its ways has influence in our lives constantly. We're bombarded with things that are not of God. And so to just help keep ourselves walking on that straight and narrow, if you will, to be separated into God is the safest and the most amazing, loving place that we could ever live our lives in.
And I think just that word holiness, Mama J, it's a word that it's kind of been put in the back burner. But when you start to say it and it starts to resonate in your soul, holiness, and you get that visual and that picture of, heaven when everyone's singing, holy, holy is the Lord.
Yeah.
It starts to stir up inside you. And I think that's something that we really need to purpose our minds in that too, and move closer to that holiness and constantly, think of being in the presence, like you said, being in the presence of God and just how that's going to feel when you're standing there and it's just that holiness and that energy.
The awesome majesty of God. Woo, I think it's so amazing. Well, when we consider all of these things and we think of how privileged we are to be able to have a relationship with God. In the Old Testament, they weren't able to have that relationship in how we are able to enjoy it today. And so we are a blessed people. And it's our privilege to be sold out to God because he's worthy to receive all of our effort and energy and dedication and devotion because he is so amazing.
Love it. So thank you once again, Epic Conquerors podcast community.
Yeah,
and
we
everyone
love you
else
guys.
out there. We love you guys. Thank you for sharing this podcast with your friends and family. Continue to write us, Mama Jana, and the rest of the team. Love hearing your comments and your feedback as we walk through this life journey together. We face it, fight it, and overcome it. And now's that time to say ciao for now.
Ciao for now. Okay. See you on Mondays and Fridays. Bye, everybody.
New Testament evangelism and discipleship training. The Master's Class. Online courses created for 21st century believers. Experience his joy and a front row seat to miracles. Start today. Eternity matters.